Key point 1. Where silence is the loudest, every story matters. In most people's minds, North Korea comes with images of starved people, a despicable dictatorship, and complete isolation. Other than that, they have little to say about the country. The overbearing government tries hard to create an illusion of wealth for foreigners and its own people. Today, there is a huge percentage gap between those outside and inside North Korea. Both sides see begging children, idol worshipping, and re-education camps. But what is atrocious to foreigners is normal to those experiencing it firsthand. Propaganda is most effective in your comfort zone. The real tragedy is the gluttony of state propaganda eating people's critical thinking with a little spoon. Only a lucky few have had a glimpse of the different life and understood the wrongness of things around them. One of those was a man who never managed to live in the free world, passing that torch as a wish for his daughter. In a few years, she would carry it from one city to another, sharing her tragic story and giving a voice to those confined in the totalitarian motherland. Her name is Youngmi Park. When shedding light on oppressive regimes, there's no bias toward less or more significant suffering. Every story is important to create a better picture of life behind closed borders. It is worth noting that Youngmi Park had a slightly better living situation than many North Koreans, to the point when she was surprised to learn about her fellow citizens who had it even worse. But today, this is her story. Still, consider her engagement in social and political matters, and feel free to resonate according to your beliefs. Without further ado, let Youngmi Park introduce herself. Key point 2. A city on the edge of hell. On October 4th, 1993, a frail young woman gave birth 2 months prematurely. Her hard work during pregnancy caused early labor. Doctors couldn't promise little Youngmi's survival, especially in Hesan, the coldest place in North Korea. A border city on the Yalu riverbank, Hesan was a transit spot for smugglers, whose numbers increased immensely in the 1990s. The North Korean economy quickly deflated after the USSR collapse, dependent on Soviet and Chinese fuel and food. The deficit of imported fertilizer and extreme weather led to severe famine within the country. Humanitarian aid was rationed to the army or poached. The country barely breathed on its own, similar to newborn Youngmi. However, it wasn't like that a few decades before. Totalitarianism teaches people to worship suffering. In the 1950s to 1960s, North Korea faced a surge of economic aid from the Soviet Union and China. As the country was richer in natural minerals than South Korea, it developed faster. But 2 decades later, the communist system started to wear itself out, while the lack of private property and planned economy left people to fend for themselves. This collapse served as a call to action for smugglers, and the black market started to blossom. Even top officials couldn't restrict their activities as they had no powerful leverage. Youngmi's family, who received good status from the Kim dynasty, pioneered smuggling long before the competition left them out of business. But how could a well-off family turn into bootleggers? In North Korea, one member committing a crime spills over the whole family. This rule is not unique to this country, but the consequences are unpopular elsewhere. Youngmi's paternal grandfather was a People's Army officer during the Korean War, having a place in the Workers' Party of Korea, which gave him a high songbun or political status. However, a legal conviction against his eldest son for a serious sex offense dragged the whole family down the songbun ladder. Luckily, Youngmi's father had a knack for business, smuggling cigarettes, food, and Chinese clothes. During one of his expeditions, he met his future wife, who was disgusted with capitalism but helped her husband so they could feed their 2 daughters. One day, as they were stealing coal, Youngmi's mother went into labor. Did you know another famous defector, Hyeonseo Lee, came from Hesan? The city's border status enabled her to escape. Key point 3. To be a woman in North Korea. As capitalism surged in North Korean society, people got used to double thinking. It wasn't rare for them to hunt DVDs with Western movies after cursing devilish Yankees during community meetings. Adult Youngmi recalled her first experience with Titanic, which became the door to another world for the little girl. It resembled nothing she saw or heard, as the government only permitted materials about the party's life. Still, the omnipresent control failed to brainwash Youngmi's father, who saw beyond the state propaganda. Aside from DVDs, local markets were filled with farmers' produce and smuggled items, so Youngmi's family had periods of comfort. Her father slowly grew his business, leaving his wife and daughters to keep the household when he traveled to Pyongyang as part of the scheme. This new lifestyle had a decisive impact on the family. Staying in the capital for long periods, he lived with a young woman who helped to run the business. The budding romance disturbed a stable family, but his conscience made him return. Nevertheless, the other woman came to stay. On one occasion, Youngmi was happy to travel to Pyongyang with her dad. Mesmerized by the neon lights, restaurants, and overall civilization she had never seen at home, she still suspected there was more about her father and the other woman's relationship as they stayed at her apartment. Her mother was a real warrior to keep the family together. She ran a business in Hesan and was generally tougher than her husband. So, on the rare occasions when he was drunkenly abusive, she protected herself just fine. Sometimes the measure of a parent's love is teaching you to survive. Soon, Youngmi's mother was forced to leave to save her spouse, who was exposed and confined at a re-education camp. She had to leave her daughters alone to visit her husband. In winter, Youngmi and her older sister, Yoonmi, struggled to find food, eating roots or insects as short food supplies ran out. Eventually, Youngmi's mother had no choice but to send her youngest daughter to well-off relatives to save her. Later, she sold their house and moved to Youngmi's uncle's home in Kawan to provide for the three of them. All this time, she continued working as a merchant. When Youngmi turned 11, she joined her mother, learning to bribe guards and selling state-owned persimmons. Once you start trading for yourself, you start thinking for yourself. Youngmi Park. Key point 4. No time left to survive. In 2005 and 2006, capitalism continued to corrode North Korea. Thin CDs replaced bulky cassettes, making smuggling easier. Teenagers closed their blinds to watch forbidden movies and listen to anything but hymns to Kim Jong-il. Some girls even dared to wear jeans and dye their hair, a punishable act in DPRK. It was the generation that didn't grow at times when the government could take care of its citizens and thus was less loyal to the regime. It was what 13-year-old Youngmi said after her return to Hesan. She changed, and so had her hometown. As we remember, Youngmi lived with her sister and mother at her uncle's house in Kawan for a while, but the arrangement ended when the police exposed her mother's illegal house sale. In North Korea, property never truly belonged to the owners. Eventually, she turned herself in to a re-education camp for a few weeks. Around the same time, Youngmi's sick, unrecognizable father returned home. Due to his criminal past, his brother no longer welcomed him. Bribe culture has always flourished among prison and border guards, which helped to reunite the family back in Hesan. But, as we already know, their home was no longer the same. The mid-2000s were detrimental to the North Korean economy. Poverty spread over more and more neighborhoods, becoming especially clear compared to the well-off Chinese households across the riverbank. At some point, many young women started crossing the border, searching for a better life. Youngmi's family was starving. Her father couldn't provide because of his feeble health, and smuggling became challenging. The only thing that kept young Youngmi slightly hopeful was Chun-gin, her first love. Coming from a wealthy family, he ignored the girl's low status. As there was no sex education in North Korea, their love was innocent, showing the boy's tender care for Youngmi. Love is too ethereal to substitute basic human needs at times of survival. Unfortunately, even the promise of marriage couldn't save Youngmi in a famished country unless she saved herself. The opportunity presented itself when Yoonmi didn't return home one night. The only note she left was the address of a local broker who could move her little sister to China. Key point 5. Dangerous liaisons. Smuggling wasn't the only business flourishing on the Chinese-Korean border in the 2000s. Human trafficking rapidly spread over the area as well. Many North Korean girls and women used this opportunity to escape, whether they were aware of the consequences or not. In China, they were sold to men in rural areas to serve as wives and workers. Their refugee status stripped them of any rights, leading to rampant instances of violation and sexual abuse. However, when Yoon Mi disappeared, neither Yang Mi nor her mother expected this fate for themselves or that the journey would start the same night they entered the broker's house. Like many North Korean defectors, the mother and daughter could not say goodbye to their loved ones, including Yang Mi's anxious father. The broker quickly handed them over to the Chinese smugglers, banning them from revealing their real ages or relation to each other. For a teenage girl who never interacted with anyone outside her family, Yang Mi was innocent and outwardly naive, endangering her to all kinds of evil. It was easy to trick her with delicious food and necessities. After all, she had no idea about hot showers, toothpaste, or sanitary products. The horror started immediately after the crossing when her mother intervened to protect Yang Mi from a smuggler's unwanted advances. This incident marked Yang Mi's first exposure to sexual conduct. She soon realized she'd have to separate from her mother, who was to be sold to a farmer. With a heavy heart, she let her go to become a wife to another trafficker herself. His name was Hong Wei, and their relationship was hard to describe. He persistently sexually concerned Yang Mi until she reluctantly agreed to his demands in a desperate bid to save her parents. At one point, the severity of her circumstances drove her to contemplate ending her own life to escape her tormentor. On the other hand, Hong Wei kept his word as he helped Yang Mi's father escape. In a sense, he had a perverse kind of love for her. Unfortunately, her dad soon passed away due to cancer. This loss was even more heartbreaking for 13-year-old Yang Mi because she couldn't find her sister to unite over the common grief. Within a year, she and her mother experienced violence, wealth, unity, and loss. And things began changing again, and not in a good direction. Unfortunately, tragedy reveals the true self more than happiness. Key point 6. Follow the North Star to see the Southland. If living with a top human trafficker didn't seem dangerous enough, the trouble continued when Yang Mi decided to provide herself as Hong Wei's business went badly wrong. Preparations for the Beijing 2008 Olympics included jailing as many human traffickers and trafficked individuals as possible for reputation reasons. In urgent need of an ID, Yang Mi fell into the arms of another man, Huang, who kept her hostage in hopes of a blessed pregnancy with a son promised by the soothsayer. As nasty as it sounds, the girl promised the infatuated kidnapper to stay if he returned her mother from yet another marriage. However, the girl didn't come back to him. Instead, she and her mother were on the way to Shenyang, where Ma Ying-uk, a fellow trafficked woman, offered them a job. Hong Wei helped them out and ultimately fell for Yang Mi in the process. Now an adult, she recalls having mixed feelings about him. After all, Hong Wei treated her almost like family, but he also abused her physically. What waited for the mother and daughter in Shenyang wasn't what they expected. Work in adult chat rooms, mainly with South Koreans. It was the dawn of the webcam, yet despite the primitive technologies, Yang Mi's mother struggled to type fast and make money. For Yang Mi, however, it was a practical opportunity. She was a good conversationalist and struggled less to defend her barriers before needy clients. As she started making money, a door to a better future opened. The one who held it open was Hai Soon, another North Korean in China. She offered Yang Mi and her mother a way out to South Korea through the most popular route, Mongolia. Later, they found themselves in the middle of the night in the Gobi Desert, with a small group of defectors and a broken flashlight, trying not to be caught by Chinese authorities and sent back to North Korea. The group navigated by following the North Star, but even the successful escape to Mongolia was not the end. In fact, it was the beginning of another chapter of the same story. The chapter's name was South Korea. We should be glad for not knowing our future, or else we wouldn't pursue it. Key point 7. New life, new rules. Fate was in favor for Yang Mi. Soon after she and her mother were taken from Mongolia to South Korea as part of the defection program, which included fake IDs to fly, their integration into the enemy country started. The women spent time at the National Intelligence Center, a heavily secured facility necessary for identifying North Korean spies, and the Hanawon Resettlement Center before they could enter South Korean society. When it finally happened and the government provided them with a small apartment, they hoped they would finally be happy. But teenage Yang Mi stuck out like a sore thumb. Eager to learn what was forbidden in North Korea, Yang Mi switched between different schools to catch up with her peers. However, she faced low expectations from teachers and disaffection from classmates. Specifically, her North Korean accent separated her from other teenagers. That led to long periods of self-education, immense reading, and new attempts to finish her school education. One of the most influential works of literature for her was George Orwell's Animal Farm, as she recognized her motherland on the pages. When real life intrudes, even the sweetest heaven can turn into hell. While her daughter stayed the course, Yang Mi's mother didn't stop looking for her eldest child, who'd been missing for 2.5 years. The trip to China, full of fear of being captured, resulted in nothing. Then, one day, Yang Mi was presented with what seemed like a life chance. She was invited to participate in a new TV show revolving around North Korean defectors. Now on my way to meet you. After a long hesitation, she and her mother appeared, hoping Yoon Mi would watch and return to them. Unfortunately, their wish didn't come true until much later, when Yoon Mi managed to get to South Korea by herself, having no clue she'd meet her family there. Long before that day, Yang Mi chose her path after passing the GED test. Although she lived in injustice her whole life, it was her mother's boyfriend whose abusive behavior convinced her to pursue a criminal justice major. Soon, her journey took a surprising turn. Key point 8. Finding herself in the brave new world. North Korean students are unique in the South Korean education environment. Because of the knowledge gap and high-pressure study culture, many young people from above the 38th parallel, separating the two Koreas, struggled to keep up and eventually dropped out of their majors. Yang Mi got to experience it firsthand at the very beginning. She had to confidently impress the university admissions department and study harder than other students. Her kryptonite was the computer and physical activities, obligatory for the criminal justice major, the most challenging at Dangguk University. At some point, her hopes to graduate were undermined by physical tests. She was naturally feeble and malnourished from constant studying, so it was no surprise she fainted frequently. But more than technologies and push-ups, Yang Mi struggled with English. Props to her, she didn't give up, showing her natural determination that brought her from a town in North Korea to one of the top South Korean universities. Education is the freedom of people and the nightmare of tyranny. Yang Mi devoured everything she could reach, like audiobooks and TED Talks. She became a walking trivia on Rachel and Ross. Obviously, it wasn't enough to be fluent, which soon brought Yang Mi to uncharted, so-called evil territory, the United States of America. The clips and images of scary Yankees torturing women and children still stood before her eyes. But the moment she saw parents with their kids and laughing teenagers, she resonated with them more than speaking any amount of English. Her destination was a shelter for the homeless as part of the Christian youth group. Despite not being religious, it was the right place for Yang Mi to learn compassion and solidarity. Considering she never received it, she didn't acquire much English, but that trip revealed her calling. We all have our own deserts. They may not be the same as my desert, but we all have to cross them to find a purpose in life and be free. Yang Mi Park. Soon after, she gave speeches at the Canadian Maple International School and One Young World Summit. By revealing the truth about the North Korean regime, she gave a voice to those who lived in silence. But then, one day, she heard a voice in response. It was her sister. And today, Yang Mi and the two most important women in her life continue the journey together. Conclusion. The Bible says God is faithful, and He will not let you be tested beyond your strength. But with your testing, He will also provide you the way out so that you may be able to endure it. Yang Mi had nothing to do with religion in a country where the only gods were the Kim dynasty. Long into adulthood, she couldn't force herself into Christianity, as if jumping from one onlooker to another. Even at times when others sought to help her, she resonated through her personal experience. Hungry children, lack of freedom, trafficked, and a black sheep in a society of high achievers, instead of Christian humility. Ultimately, Yang Mi Park found her calling in advocating for North Koreans, and she didn't need any faith in outside deities, just faith in herself. Looking more closely, we see that the great force propelling Yang Mi Park through all hardships was her trust in her power and love for her family. She was born facing the good life across the border she was told she couldn't have. Maybe this sight called her to courage and the sense of self-worth she developed throughout her journey. Yang Mi's itinerary included North Korea, China, South Korea, and the U.S., so she could see it all. Complicated relationships, hard choices, and threats from her motherland led her to where she is now. Yang Mi learned the meaning of the word to inspire as a compliment after one of her speeches. Indeed, her story can encourage us to do something more than ourselves. Try this. Read The Girl with Seven Names, the story of another North Korean defector, Hyunseo Lee. Watch documentaries about North Korea like Inside North Korea, Crossing the Line, A State of Mind, or Songs from the North.